more remote than usual today, but shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to go ahead and read a message, and then we can do a roll call and make sure we have a quorum. And so, as permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of, I believe, January 7th, 2022 now, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the meeting is as transparent as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance, provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website or on Cmap's website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. So with that said, Molly, were you going to be taking a roll call?
I'll take roll.
Awesome.
Perfect. So, all right, Cmap rep?
Here.
CTA rep?
Here.
PACE rep?
Present.
RTA rep?
Present.
Metro rep?
I'm here.
FHWA rep?
Present.
Council of Mayors rep?
Present. Jeff Shelkey.
Okay, and let me write that down. CDOT rep?
Present.
Counties rep?
Present.
FTA rep? And chair.
I'm present.
All right, that's your roll call. And it looks like you have quorum.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So do we have any agenda changes or announcements?
No.
I guess I'll take the opportunity to make an announcement. So IDOT Bureau of Planning, the primary metropolitan manager assigned to Cmap is Tom Kelso. He's going to be continuing to be assigned to Cmap, but we're going to add Doug DeLilly to the assignment to assist Tom and myself with primarily meeting coverage, but also invoice work and things like that. So those of you who hear from us or correspond with us from time to time, please start including Doug, and we'll get him on to introduce himself in meetings as they come around. So that was my announcement. Does anybody have any questions or anything else they'd like to come up or bring up? And if not, I think the next item on the agenda are the meeting minutes from the last meeting. So attached to everybody's agenda was a link to the November 15th, 2021 minutes. Well, they're dated the 15th meeting, right? Looks like it's on the 17th, but does anybody have any questions or comments or want to discuss the minutes?
No.
Okay, well, if there's no comments or discussion warranted, does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll motion to approve.
Jeff Shelkey seconds.
Okay, and Molly, would you like to handle the vote?
Sure thing. Okay, CTA,
Yay.
PACE,
Yay.
RTA?
Yes.
Metro?
Yes.
Council of Mayors?
Yes.
CDOT?
Yes.
Counties?
Yes.
And chair.
Yep,
Motion passed.
awesome. So we've got the minutes taken care of. Next on the agenda is new business. So FY 2023 UWP core and competitive proposals. Angela, is this something you or Aaron were planning on speaking to?
I can go ahead and do the quick talking points. Erin, is she on the call? Yes, I see her. Erin, did you have anything you, okay. She says no, so I'll proceed. At your place or emailed or via constant contact, you should have received a memo from me dated January 5th. I'll kind of go through some components of it, open the floor for questions, and hoping we can convene a vote today. So with the approval of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act by Congress in November of this year, we're in 21, the region is expected to receive an increase of approximately $4.1 million in federal funding for fiscal year 23. With the required match, the total UWP funding is $28.5 million, which is an increase of 5.7 or 20% as compared to fiscal year 22. The $4.1 million represents the new baseline amount, federal baseline amount. And for fiscal years 24 through 27, budgets will include an additional 2% increase each year until 27 ends, I'm sorry. A new requirement of this funding includes an appropriation of 2.5% of the total funding to be allocated for complete streets planning. And for fiscal year 23, this represents about $715,000. In developing the budget this year, I did get a couple requests for revisions. CDOT, CTA, and PACE requested to submit revised budgets in light of additional funding. This resulted in an increase from what was initially submitted in their proposals of $144,500. CDOT requested $112 to add one staff position to their budget, and this cost includes salaries plus benefits. CTA requested that the Loop Rail Capacity Modeling Competitive Project be funded for the full cost of $400, which was a $20,000 increase above their original request. And then PACE requested a 10% increase in the rideshare program of about $12,500. In addition, Cmap revised its initial proposal to request that the remaining UWP funding be allocated to cover its FY23 budget as outlined in our budget and UWP work plan document. So today I'm requesting the following. Approval for Cmap of $22.7 million, CDOT $1,009,500, the county $200, Council of Mayors $1,916,368, CTA $625, Metra $650, PACE under their two programs, the Smart Mobility $150,000 and PACE $137,000. We're also, I'm also requesting approval for CTA's Loop Rail Capacity Modeling Project that was submitted by CTA in the amount of $400,000. And with that, there's a table 1 included so you can see the breakdown. If you note, the complete streets funding has been segregated near the bottom of the table. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Angela, this is Heather. I'm just wondering if you can give us some more detailed overview of how Cmap proposes to use the addition of the $3.9 million. I know in the memo it talks about additional staff and expenses related to that. I'm wondering if you can talk about, how many new staff and what they'll be focusing on specifically.
Sure, don't have I think I can go off from memory, but let's see if I have my points here. We did increase our UWP. So let me talk in general terms. Our entire budget that will be presented to the board on Wednesday, our annual budget reflects an increase of 17 people, of which I believe 13 are on the UWP budget. So we're increasing our headcount for fiscal year 23. In addition, we have, let's see if I can pull up my points, Heather. We, in addition, I'm sorry, under personnel costs, not just the increase in headcount, we also had a pretty significant increase in our healthcare costs. I'm sure most of your CFOs at your organizations are experiencing the same dynamic, but with the pandemic and the number of claims just happening throughout the country, we experienced a 13% increase in our benefits costs for medical coverage. And so we were actually able to negotiate that down to an 8% increase. So that's factored in there as well. Included in the personnel budget is also, I believe, about 3% for merit motion, compensation adjustments. As you all can imagine, we're experiencing the great resignation right now. And to hire staff, the market is very competitive. So we had to factor some budget in there for that as well. Our rents did go up this year in our year, 2 or 3 of our lease with the old post office. So there's an increase there. And I believe there was an increase in our contractual. We've got some large projects underway. One of the biggest ones being a project for my department, the Enterprise Resource Planning System, which is $600,000 alone that it will cost us, the agency, to implement. We're going to implement starting June the 1st. And if you go out to our website, you see that we've actually issued an RFP for proposals. I believe we have some pretty, trying to look, this is from memory, Heather. I want to say the other big increase is in, we've got some costs in our budget related to the mobility work, the equitable engagement work. I believe we have project management implementation in there as well. So those are some of the large projects. Now, we've got some big projects in our budget this year, but those are the ones primarily covered by the UWP. I'm happy to share more details with you, Heather, if you want after the call.
So Angela, let me pipe in for just 1 minute here to say that, when the Capital Bill Rebuild Illinois was passed, we didn't add any additional programming staff to the team. But given the influx of revenues through the doubling of the gas tax and the motor vehicle registration fees, plus the Capital Bill on top of that, we're anticipating that we're going to need to be able to support the region's transportation stakeholders with additional programming, with small traffic area forecasting, and really making sure that our transportation modeling is meeting the needs of the size of the infrastructure bill here too. So I'd imagine you'll see a majority of those positions go to transportation programming initiatives across the region. The other thing too, with the 4 new core proposals or core new programs in the infrastructure bill, so there's a bridge program, there's a carbon reduction program, the resiliency program, and the electric vehicle infrastructure program. We are digging into the details of how we as a region are going to need to develop programs to meet those needs. So it looks like, we'll be working on electrical vehicle infrastructure plan for the region. And additionally, that PROTECT program that is a resiliency program for transportation metrics. If we build in those metrics for the region's transportation projects, implementers will be available to get a 10% discount on the federal funds that they spend on projects. So, those are going to be some of the priority projects, the bigger projects that you're going to see in our budget that will go to our board on Wednesday.
Heather, one more thing I want to mention. So I think I mentioned this when I had calls with each of the agencies prior to developing the budget. With the FAST Act being our mark for the last 2 years, we were unable to budget our full costs, or we weren't able to get it from the UWP. So we did use a significant amount of local dues, and we did apply for quite a few SPR grants because with the earmark of the FAST Act, we were capped. So our budget has actually been trending above the last earmark for the last 2 years. And so with this budget, we're now just getting revenues in line with our real expense model here at the agency. So in addition to what Aaron and I, that's kind of what's making up the budget, but I can share more details with you if you like.
So thank you for that. And I think a follow-up question is that with the addition of the about 3.9 going to Cmap, are we anticipating this level of increase moving forward in FY24 and beyond?
So two things, as I mentioned. So from starting, this is the new baseline. Every year we'll get 2% increase over the baseline. So if you think over the 4-year program, that's an 8% increase. We have the Complete Streets funding. Like I said, if you look in the budget, that's money that we've got to figure out what to do. We are a zero-based agency, which means that we develop our budget every year based on what we actually need. So in terms of a fixed budget, personnel costs are pretty fixed and rents are pretty much fixed. Other things ebb and flow. So I would say that this isn't, and Aaron, you can chime in definitely. I would say that other than those two known factors, everything else is zero-based budgeting. So it ebbs and flows every fiscal year.
But if you're adding 17 staff, you're going to have to, they're not to 1-year positions. You're going to continue those. So that's your biggest expense in the administration. Those positions will continue, correct? So this is actually an increase in your base level of funding for the next few years.
So again, personnel and rents are the two factors that are a must. Where our second largest bucket of cost is consulting costs. So that's where the zero-based budgeting becomes more important, is when it comes to consulting costs. That's where you have that latitude there. But rents and people, you're right, those are in our budget.
I'll note that the 17 was a total of UWP plus grant positions.
Right.
We have a number of grants that'll be expiring that have short-term horizon projects.
Right.
Angela, I got another question. Before the new funding came in, what we're working on, we submitted applications in the fall. Were those increases of the administration cost, the healthcare, the rent, was that in the budget at that point? So it really didn't affect
yeah, it was, yes.
Okay, so that's not a reason for the increase of the 3 points.
No, I'm just outlining our biggest increases. That was in there, but the compromise we were making by adding that, because we must, was on the consultant side. Because the mark is the mark. We can't go greater than the mark. And that's kind of what's missing in this equation, is that Cmap, at least for the 6 years I've been here, our operating costs have pretty much been over the mark. And so what we've been doing is using local dues, deferring expenses until the next fiscal year if we can, or we've been applying for SBR. We have quite a few SBR grants. That's really become a big driver of funding for us, because we didn't have enough money under the UWP funding to support our full operational costs. So what's happened, that's that in a nutshell, but the benefits cost was already baked in there, yes. So what we had to do was take out other projects.
Bless you. Does anybody have any other questions or comments for Angela? Jason.
Jason has his hand up.
I turn my camera on. So it seems like, your budget has not been approved yet, but the budget that you're proposing includes this increase. Isn't it not? So it seems like a little out of order for us, the UWP, to be kind of weighing in on this budget question for Cmap. It seems like you guys should get a budget approved, assuming the original amount that we had discussed last month, and whether or not the board wants to use the remaining of UWP. It seems a little bit outside of the UWP to be weighing in that's where it should be going. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, in terms of, like, shouldn't we just wait for that conversation to take place first? Because it seems like a little presumptuous for us as the UWP committee to just say, yeah, we think Cmap needs to be adding these roles at this time.
So when we develop,
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Erin.
if I may. So when we develop our comprehensive budget and work plan for the agency, it includes a number of things that the Metropolitan Planning Program of Title 23 requires us to do. So long-range planning, transportation modeling for the region's stakeholders and agencies. And I think the biggest thing right now is, with these 4 new competitive programs and the requirement for us to do complete streets work, additional capacity that we're going to need to be able to program for all of the stakeholders, all of the implementers. Our TIP team has not grown in headcount since the inception of the agency, but yet we've doubled our local revenues and we're doubling our federal revenues. So for us, this is making sure that we're able to do the back end work, the planning work, and provide you all and your consultants with the resources that they need to be able to move your projects forward. In addition, I know that a number of the planning liaisons and the councils of mayors have had challenges making sure that they're maintaining staff. Our staff really serve as a backfill for them. So, making sure that all of your projects have their approvals to move forward with federal dollars is, I think, a top priority for us right now. So we want to make sure that we're prepared for the influx of funding and the influx of projects that are coming to the region.
Okay, thank you. But that's part of the puzzle, right? The other part is the portion of Cmap that doesn't do those core things related to transportation. And then the concern I have is that, again, the additional of those programs, yes, that those are now part of the purview of transportation, but it's all the other things that aren't necessarily in the transportation bill that Cmap also does. That we also
if there's anything, Jason, that the things that we get external grants for water from IDNR or IEPA are self-funded. The work that we do on the regional economy is work that helps us project what types of jobs and people movement are going to happen across the region. We haven't been doing a whole lot of dedicated housing work, but the new metropolitan planning program includes housing, and we are anticipating that we are going to need to do some housing work under the title itself. So again, there really isn't anything that we do here that I can't tie to transportation.
So John Donovan, did you have a comment?
I did. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble finding everything on the screen today. So, I've been working with Cmap region for 12 years now. So, whenever Cmap has an increase in their budget, we usually get a lot of the similar discussion that's going on today. So I feel like it's probably just appropriate for me to kind of take a step back and mention a few things first. First, UWP budget is the budget for the MPO, which is more than just Cmap, which is more than just the Cmap staff. But it is the transportation planning budget. It does get voted on after the Cmap budget gets passed by the board. The MPO policy committee is ultimately the body that approves the UWP program. That will be occurring in March. This committee obviously serves in a role to help roll that up, but that's when the vote occurs. That's when it happens. I'll also mention, I've been looking at these UWP programs for a long time. I think we always got to remember the history of how Cmap came to be back in the CATS days. And again, this looks very similar to the ones that were rolled out through the Chicago Area Transportation Study for decades. A lot of funding to the non-Cmap or at that time, the non-CATS entities. That's pretty unusual for an MPO. So I just want to make sure that gets highlighted. When CATS was a subset of state government, there was definitely value for the state of Illinois to make sure folks felt appreciated and part of the process. And part of that was done by kind of spreading the money around. Quite frankly, there are staff positions and partner agencies funded by the UWP program. That is extremely rare on a national level. I personally am a big fan of the Council of Mayors program. I'm not necessarily talking about that, but that's a very different type of program as well. You find very, very few examples of kind of that intermediary outreach to kind of the local agencies. But again, just kind of the regular partner agencies, the big transit agencies, City of Chicago is obviously a big player. It's pretty unusual to directly fund kind of the regular activities, some of the regular transportation and planning activities of those partner agencies. So I do want to mention that that's still a highlight of the program. That's still something we highlight. I went back to the 2002 certification review, 20 years old now. My counterpart at the time, the FTA counterpart at the time, was raising the very same issue. So this has been around for some time. There still appears to be a little over $4 million. I don't know what it works out to be, roughly 20% that goes outside of the MPO staff in terms of this UWP funding. That's a pretty large percentage. Again, this region is free to determine the best way to use those funds. It's not our place to tell you how to use those funds per se, but I do want to give you a little perspective that in terms of staffing, this region is a little unique. And I don't feel that the MPO staff requests have ever been particularly extreme. Obviously, we're going into another certification review this spring. If there are areas that we find are insufficient in terms of meeting the planning regulations or our expectations, usually we want to see a funding commitment to address those issues as well. With all that, I just felt, I know Tom Rickard's been here a lot longer than I have. There's been some other folks that have been through the wars, but a little perspective. And I understand when new money's coming down the pipe, and believe me, we're dealing with this in many ways, shapes, and forms these days. But when new money comes down the pipe, everyone wants to be very careful about where it goes. And I'll just say I've reviewed this budget. I'm perfectly comfortable with it. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions, but I did feel it's kind of necessary to provide a little perspective on where we've been and where I think we're going to be going.
Thank you, John, for your historical perspective and also your comments on your review of the budget. David, do you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I'm not against increasing the budget. And out of the other agencies, we're less than 150,000 increase. And, we do have new funding and the Cmap budget should be increased. My concern is about the expenditures of being able to spend this in the 1 year. In FY 21, from what I looked at the report, the fourth quarter, it showed an expenditure, uncommitted, unspent balance of 3.4 million. So I guess, that was in 21. I don't know what the 22 numbers are, but based on how things are going, will the expenditures be obligated and spent in 1 year? I mean, that's a big chunk of money. And I guess what is reasonable? I mean, and is there an option? Could we increase, say, the complete streets funding for a year to get it really kicked off, started, and ease into this as we move into the 24 program, and being able to make sure we have the expenditures that we can have more of a regional involvement of the new funding. So that's like my concerns is that, yes, you need more funding for the region. We have more programs, need more staff, but at almost 4 million, can you spend it?
So Dave, we did spend our 21 budget. And so what we need to do a better job on the Cmap side is when we close our fiscal year, we need to update those quarterly reports. We did spend our full 21 budget. We're obviously in 22. We meet every other month to look at our budget to actuals to see how we're spending, but we did spend our 21 budget in total, maybe a couple thousand, but we did spend it.
I'll share too that on that.
And the goal, obviously, we're not at, it's not in our best interest to ask for funding we're not confident we can't spend. So our goal is to spend our 23 budget requests as well.
I was just going to add too that one of the things that we did with the 22 budget when we had some additional resources that we didn't spend due to COVID, people not traveling, at the MPO meeting, a couple meetings back, Division Administrator Coker said the region isn't in compliance with their ADA planning across the region and risk federal funds. So we are transitioning all of those funds to a region-wide ADA program as well that we anticipate actually is going to need additional resources than the ones that we are transferring, and that the department has graciously let us roll into a new program here. But, again, I think our capacity to move on our feet, that was the exact question that Holly and Mike asked when we were talking about our needs. Given the increases, are we going to be able to spend it? And then we've drafted a number of different strategies for us to make sure that we're getting this money out the door. But you're right, there's lots of good bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that needs to be taken advantage of too. So I think that's a good thing to keep on the table for future conversations.
Well, thank you. It looks like there's a few more discussion comments in the queue. Vig, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Mike. And Aaron and Angela for the explanations you've given. I just wanted to build on what Jason was saying about like the sequence. I think we're obviously like you've referenced sort of two big historic things going on, right? The pandemic, which is affecting us all and driving a lot of unusual things in costs and talent attention, talent retention. And then the federal bill, which is, you know, kind of historic moment for the region, for the nation. And so I think like, I understand you have, we all want to get our house in order and our books correct for the fiscal year. Is there an opportunity to sort of just have a bit more time to collectively, you know, I like the themes, right? We want to be ready as a region to collectively bring more money into the region from the federal government and do well on these programs. I like the themes of, you know, supporting the implementing agencies and in exactly doing that. But I think, not to speak for everyone else, but at least, you know, from CDOT perspective, just having some, we're wrapping our heads around the same things, right? Trying to read that, trying to understand which programs, what we need to be ready, you know, how we could work together with our partner agencies and you. And so could you just explain a little bit more about the FY23, you know, budget process and the time that, you know, backing out of when a decision needs to be made, when we can really make this decision on this particular UWP item. And then to Jason's point, you know, I think that was a valid point about, you know, the board having an input on the overall budget first as well.
So the timeline, we have to submit our budget to IDOT, and IDOT, please confirm this. I believe it's mid-February.
Yeah, we're hoping for February 14th.
February 14th. So we're taking a draft version of the budget to the board in January, which includes the UWP. It would go to the board in February for approval. Now and at the same time, I'm submitting this budget to IDOT. March, it would be formally approved by the MPO in March, transportation in February, and then the MPO in March. So this timeline is extremely tight. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Angela.
Okay.
Yeah, and we put that February 14th time or deadline out there in hopes that we can get through the agreement process by July 1st. So we can get everybody authorized in time for the next state fiscal year. So it's a little bit aggressive, but it's something that we feel is necessary to get everything set up in time to kick off on July 1st. So Christina Bader, did you have any comments?
Yeah, so this is just going back to that question of understanding the zero-based budget comment and how that's how this program works. But in reality, this budget implicates a multi-year increase for Cmap, and just wondering about for next year's program or years going forward, if increases in other agencies' core or the competitive program then just were expected to take our increases out of the 2% yearly increase. And if Cmap's core requests will likely also go up, it would come out of that as well.
Christina, that's $1 million question. So let me give a little quick backtrack on the how historical work, and many of you know that historical means you're not taking your prior fiscal year costs and you're adding a multiplier on it for the next year. You're really looking at your resources, your contracts, you're looking at all your costs, and you're saying this is what I need for the fiscal year. As I mentioned, personnel costs, I mean, if we hire people, we will need those people. And rents are rents, you know, we owe that to the old post office. But there are other line items in our budget that will be based on need for that specific year. So it's not a historical number I'm carrying over year to year. So I guess what I was alluding to was that our second largest contract bucket is consulting costs. That's going to be based on need, and it won't be based on a historical number. So if there's, the latitude would come from, you know, the big areas like consulting costs, or maybe it's our training budget, or maybe it's, I can't think of our budget line by line, but maybe it's in our commodities. So there's no, we just take the prior year's budget and multiply by 5% increase. We don't do that. We literally start with all lines at zero except for personnel and rents, because that's fixed. We have people and we have to have a place to work. So does that make sense? How we develop the budget?
Yeah, I think it's just something, you know, we all just have to consider when we're looking at this, is that an increase of this size is really a multi-year commitment, and where future increases to the other agencies' core and the competitive program could possibly come from. I guess just, this isn't about this budget, but next year's budget, it looks like it was decided that the competitive program mark would be decided in June. And I was just wondering if there's a procedure for how this group is deciding that.
Hadn't really thought about the mechanics of that, but we do meet in June. And so as I think Heather has mentioned or asked several times, is that I guess June would be the month we'd make a decision on what that looks like. Before, it has to be June because we start the budget process in September, I believe.
I understand. I guess I'm more asking, like, is it going to be, you know, are you guys going to come up with a number that you recommend to us and then we talk about it? Or is it going to be some other kind of calculation?
I think let me think on that.
Let me butt in here. And I think one of the things that we need to do, just given the fact that we have a new infrastructure bill for the region, is that we need to take this conversation a little bit higher up to our policy level committee folks for next year's budget, to have a fuller understanding of what the needs of the region are, where we're in alignment and agreement on that core programs and the competitive programs across the region and how they move forward together, and map that out. Unfortunately, you know, with having to get the UWP budget and the agency's budget together and to IDOT by February 14th, we're a little bit between a rock and a hard place here, not getting the marks until November, and, you know, having to put together a budget here, but then also not knowing how the infrastructure bill is going to play out, right? And so once we have a resiliency plan for the region, you know, that's one of those big things that I think agencies are going to want, because they'll be able to match 90-10 as opposed to 80-20. That seems to me like a highest and best use of our resources in the next year or two, is to put that together, figure out what metrics we're going to use, embed that in our programming process, right? And then, you know, and then we don't have to do that anymore, right? And so I think what we'll see in the future is that we're ramping up to get a whole bunch of stuff ready, but there's opportunities and flexibility for us to think about how we extend and how we set these budget parameters for things like the competitive and the core programs. Again, I know that the cost increases for the PLs across the region, right? You need a competitive wage to get people to work for the councils of mayors too. That's another big area where I think we're going to have some conversations. But I think setting those parameters requires us to have a larger conversation with the Transportation Committee and possibly the MPO Committee as well, before then we bring that back down to this committee for a discussion. So I would like to do that in the next year here. But, you know, again, there's some big ticket items that the new infrastructure bill has in it that I think we need to accomplish before we understand what those budgets are going to be.
Thanks.
Thank you. Heather, did you have another comment or question?
Sure. And, you know, I appreciate this conversation. I think we've had some good explanations given by Cmap and some good questions by some of the other members. But I think that given the amount of the additional money, the impacts on future programs, I think it warrants more discussion to get me at least to a point where we're comfortable voting on this program. So I'd like to suggest that we delay the vote. And if I can submit a motion to delay this vote until we have more opportunity to discuss the use of the additional approximately, I think, $4.1 million.
I second, CTA seconds that motion. And just to add a little bit to our second, we would be interested in seeing the results of your presentation of this budget to your board this week and policy committee this week.
So that's the interesting part. I won't be making a presentation to the board. The way it works is the UWP is part of that. What they're approving is our total budget. And they can't approve a budget that hasn't been approved by the committee.
Recommended to move
Or recommended, I'm sorry.
for the committee. So Christina, not tomorrow, on Wednesday, we're presenting an overview, a broad overview, and the draft annual budget and work plan to our board. They don't vote on it until February.
Understood. And I guess we would just like to see the conversation that comes out of those meetings from some of the higher leadership folks about this budget.
So I know I have my Roberts Rule expert on the call today, but I think we need to continue the discussion before we have any motion. So Tom, do you want to make a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question. It may be, but right now I just want to make a comment. I guess I concur with John that our region has done things a little bit different, and I believe that there's a lot of benefits that have come out of that. At the same time, I also concur with Cmap that under the new federal bill, there's a lot of additional requirements. There's a lot of additional programming. The bike ped aspect, ADA, climate, mobility recovery, equity. There's a lot of areas that were not under consideration a year or two ago that we have to figure out how are we going to move all this forward and address that. So I understand. I understand the need for the increased funding, but I'm also kind of a little bit hesitant too about, how much and how quickly, I guess. Again, I think these funds they're meant for the MPO efforts, and I'm grateful that we have additional funding that historically has been available for the competitive program as well as local technical assistance. I really feel like the local technical assistance and the competitive program has bettered our region. And so I'm very concerned, even in light of conversations as recently within the last year, both from the Cmap board and the MPO, committee, that they really wanted to make sure we had a strong competitive program as best we can. And I am a little concerned that the competitive program, as well as potentially the funding for local technical assistance in the future will be lessened. I think ultimately that's going to occur eventually, but I think it's a detriment to our region when that day does come. So I am a little concerned about how quickly. I know that we do need monies in Cmap in order to add these additional programs that we have to accomplish. And so I don't know. I tend to lean towards that we got to figure this out and figure it out quickly. But at the same time, I don't want to make a mistake here and harm our future competitive and local technical assistance program. In the past, I think most of you have heard me talk about the work plan for Cmap and how really that should be part of our development process. Obviously, this year, we really, with the timing of everything and with the federal bill that being recently approved, it was very difficult to be part of the work plan development process. But I see it as very difficult for us to be able to have an intelligent conversation this group in regards to the monies that are needed to be programmed around the region, or the efforts that need to occur through the MPO process. Very difficult to make that happen and to really understand what we're even voting on when the work plan is something that isn't really part of our process. And again, I've asked for that over the years, that we be involved more with that. But that's not really the structure as it is today. So it's, I don't know. I'm kind of in a quandary myself. I'm a little conflicted about wanting to make sure that we're moving into this upcoming year with the funding that's needed in order to accomplish the MPO objectives. And so I just wanted to make that's a pretty long statement, my apologies, but I just wanted to make sure that I continue to say we really need to be more involved with understanding the work plan, understanding the budget development. And I know that takes some effort, but that's something that's typically done through a process. And I'd like to see more involvement with that. In the short term, if we have to move quickly on this, I can appreciate that aspect too, but I just wanted to make my comments that I really feel this is an awkward vote.
Thank you, Tom. And I guess I need to acknowledge my role in that and setting the deadlines for getting uniform budget templates sent down to Springfield. Several of the metropolitan planning managers did tell me that it was pretty tough to make that February 14th date. So I guess, you know, I just want to reiterate, we set that date to really put us on a trajectory to get budgets in place by July 1st. The timing of the new infrastructure bill probably did not help us too much in meeting that, because there's so many new programs, there's new money, and you know, just put I think CMAP in a difficult position to respond to our request, while also thoughtfully responding to, you know, this committee's interests and also dealing with the new program. So I should recuse myself from any further discussion as far as, you know, going one way or another. But yeah, part of this is my doing, so I will just fess up to that right now. And David, you had a couple of comments in the chat pod, and you also have your hand up. So I'm not sure if you're gonna verbalize those or had some additional stuff that we need to read through.
Yeah, I got it. Build upon it. First, Mike, you know, the first comment I was going to say is, you know, could we have a delayed excuse for turning in our homework? Basically, that you know, in terms of the new funding, it has created an issue. We know what the set amount, the total amount is, and some of the line items are already going to be known. So, I mean, is there some way you can, you know, this is the commercial, can you, some way you can work with us, IDOT work with other MPOs in progressing along in that as a transition period for a month, that we can, you know, we have the overall budget, we know how much that is, we know some of the line items, it's just some of the details. So, you know, is there something there? The other thing is, you know, yes, as Tom mentioned, a lot of the other, like the counties or the councils are going to see increases, and those may come about too in the core programs. That if we follow this, the CMAP structure of adding staff and adding into the programs most likely will continue into next year and the next several years as identified. So what is going to be left for the competitive program? Is it, right now we're what, 300,000? What are we going to do is to have the 2% for the competitive program? And what about the other core programs? You know, I just feel like we're being, you know, making a quick decision. You know, yes, CMAP needs an increase, but does it need 3.9 million increase, which is almost the entire budget of what the new funding is, whether versus let's talk about what regionally projects are available. Could we put it into the complete streets, a portion of it, let's say, that Complete Streets is everything from streets, sidewalks, pedestrian, bike ped, transit. I mean, it's defined how we make that program. So if we define it, and it's a big issue for this whole region, that we know there's going to be an interest in projects, let's kick off that project strongly and get that thing going. And then next year, let's build our budgets based on more of a equitable discussion and based on needs, because the other agencies are going to experience increased needs too based on this new federal funding. So that's just, like I said, yes, you need an increase, but does it have to be all of it?
So I'll leave a response to how the budget was developed to CMAP. As far as the deadline we imposed, I'm not going to extend the deadline just across the board. If I were to receive like a formal special request for a little bit of extra time, I would take a look at it. While the timing of the new bill's passage wasn't ideal for our budgeting process, there was still reasonably good visibility on what might happen to budgets. And the MPOs have historically not asked for less money, they've asked for more. And so there was some presumption that there was some planning underway for how those funds were going to be used. So I'd like to keep a little bit of pressure on the MPOs in general around the state to try to get budget templates developed so that we can get things approved by July 1st. But, I'll always review a request that comes in, and I guess I wouldn't mind to hear. I know Erin had her hand up, but I guess I wouldn't mind to hear what specific conversations people are hoping to have about the budgets. And what is the ask there? I guess I'm curious about if folks want to talk a little bit more about the budgets and have more time to deliberate on it. I'm not quite sure what specifically, that would look like. And I guess I would leave it to CMAP to respond to that.
Well, one of the questions that I was just going to ask too, in response to sort of Dave's question and the question about the competitive formula program or the competitive program that's included in this, is that, we do a call for projects for this. And this year we only got 2 project applications. And so, given the February 14th deadline, I don't think we're going to have time to do another open call for projects and then bring it back through the committee process to get incorporated in here. So I think that's one of the other challenges, is the way that we do this typically. So, is the question or the concern or the, that there's only one competitive project this year? I mean, I think one of the things that we aren't going to be able to hire staff into perpetuity, right? With overhead, we just can't sustain a huge increase in staff. But that consultant dollars bucket that Angela said is where we have flexibility, right? Is that when projects are done, when we get some of these initial things off the table, those are dollars that, again, we could come up with projects with, apply competitively with you all, moving forward. But I just struggling to understand what Mike was asking here is, what are we asking for?
I wasn't talking about a competitive program for this year, but just for what would be available for 24 and beyond, is that, once CMAP's budget is increased, probably it's going to stay about the same. And, whether there's only one competitive program this year, a lot of it had to do with the new regulations and new rules of trying to get those programs in place to submit. And I think that was some of the agencies had issues on, and also on staffing to maintain those programs. So I think I was looking more in the future of what funding would be available for competitive after we go through the core. What do we have to work with for competitive?
Yeah, and I think I'll just reiterate the point that I made earlier, is that I think, again, this is a subcommittee that's making a recommendation to the MPO. And so I would like to have a broader conversation about how our regional metropolitan planning funds could and should be applied and what goals and objectives. Obviously, the 2050 plan should be our top priority and is our top priority in all of the work that we do. But I think getting the higher level buy-in is probably the better approach. And then shifting down sort of the tactical sort of how do you execute on this back to a committee makes more sense than trying to sort of push it up the other direction.
Aaron, I have a question for you.
Sure. Mayor Einhorn.
Yeah, it's my understanding that SSMMA's submission was summarily disposed of because other people decided they didn't know that it could be a possible type of a project, which I personally feel is kind of a feeble excuse. Can you enlighten me as to why we were excluded?
So I think one of the things that Angela, I'll start and then I'll kick it to Angela because Angela actually had conversations with committee members about this, is that we're going to be spending about $3 million as Cmap on ADA transition planning across the region for communities. And so I believe the understanding was the committee members felt like it was duplicative of the programs, but that we do want to support SSMMA in their efforts. Angela?
Yeah, Aaron, that was pretty much it. Plus the scoring. I mean, scoring, it didn't score high enough to be considered under the competitive program. And so conversations I had with committee members all thought it was a valuable project. I don't want to be remiss in stating that. They just thought that maybe it should be funded under the larger ADA program that Cmap is spearheading. So it will. The goal is to fund it just from a different bucket.
Will the larger project address the same things as was proposed in the SSMMA proposal?
I believe the answer is yes, is that, we're planning on working directly with jurisdictions to get their ADA Title II transition plans up to speed and partner with municipals through our LTA program to do sort of that direct technical assistance with the right staff that need to be educated and brought up to speed on this.
And when will that happen?
We are in the final stages of hiring a manager for that right now. So we're hoping as soon as possible. We've got an agreement together and a scope together with IDOT. I think we're getting that back to you, Mike, later this week here. So it's actively moving forward.
Is this going to cover all the 260 some or 250 some municipalities in the region?
So our goal is for it to touch the ones that we've got sort of a two-phased approach. One is that we're going to touch communities that have high need, low capacity, and that there might be some opportunities for us to work with our higher capacity communities to partner. So, the goal is to get to as many as possible. This really isn't a 2-year project, though. You're right, it's a multi-year, probably more like an 8 to 10 year project to get everybody up to compliance.
Well, not the compliance necessarily that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the compliance as far as having the plan. And I tend to like the more global approach. That way we don't have one person work with one set of guidelines and interpreting it a certain way, and the next town over does it a different way because they have a different interpretation. So I think if it's done in that fashion, so everybody's playing with the same reasons in their mind and same criteria in their mind, sort of like what we did with the pavement evaluation, where they set the criteria and it was applied to everybody. I think that makes more sense to me, quite frankly.
No, I appreciate that, Bat, and we'll take it back to the team. I do think that is sort of their global approach, is that we want to make sure that we have consistency in those plans across the region.
Well, thank you. Any more continued discussion on item 4?
This is Jason. I just wanted to add the lack of submittals this year for competitive was no way, shape, or form due to the lack of potential studies that need to be done. It was just we didn't know what the marks were. All the rules had changed, and what was the point? Like we needed to figure all that out, and taking the time to scramble and get things together. Just speaking from Metra is like we just figured we'd do a wait and see. But that I don't want it to be construed that it wasn't because there's a lack of study that needs to be done out there.
Well, thank you for that. Any more discussion on item 4?
Yeah, this is just a timing question. If a budget isn't approved by this committee today, what what happens with the board and subsequent committee meetings?
It's a recommendation for approval first from the MPO, but ultimately the MPO is the deciding factor. So that the MPO can take your recommendation or it doesn't have to.
I guess we're just, CTA has an interest in, like I said, seeing how the other meetings of this recommended budget go this week before we would feel comfortable voting. I don't know if there would be, I don't think our February meeting date is set yet, but if we could schedule a February meeting to be before your February board meeting, we would potentially be able to have the conversations internally that we wanted to do, and also see the discussions that happen with these other groups this month.
Cmap board meets on February 9th at 9:30. So I mean, if it would have to happen before, well, that's kind of, I guess, what you're asking, Christina?
Just trying to understand the timeline and how.
It would be February 9th, their meeting at 9:30.
Thank you.
Well, it sounds like item 4 then, I guess I'd like to ask CMAP, would you like to modify your action requested, or are you still seeking approval of this item? Oh, wait, we got a
Chair, you have a
hand.
motion on the floor already.
Well, Tom,
I just had one quick question. Is this being discussed at any level at MPO on Thursday? No? Okay.
It's in my executive director's remarks, but it's not a discussion item. We're spending the time talking about the long range plan.
yeah, and apologies if I'm not quite following the rules. I was hoping to finish the discussion and then ask for a motion. And so in advance of that, I was asking if CMAP wanted to make any adjustments. So I guess at this point, the action on the action being requested is approval. And we did hear earlier that there was a motion. So I guess, is there any motion that folks would like to make about approval or another course of action right now?
I'd like to move to delay the vote until the committee has the opportunity to further discuss the use of that $4.1 million.
Is there a second?
CTA seconds.
Okay, let's discuss the motion on the table. Is there any discussion that anybody'd like to have on the motion to clarify it or anything? Well, then let's go to a vote. Oh, Tom?
Well, I guess I'm a little concerned. I mean, I understand delaying a vote, but I really think that we need to concur that we're going to meet here in the next couple of weeks then to take a vote on this. I think it's our job to try to figure out a way to keep this moving forward. And so I think we need at least concurrence that we're going to schedule another meeting. It sounds like we almost need to before the end of January.
Thanks, Tom. John?
And I guess my concern is if we're going to sit and wait for policy level decisions to be made, what role is this committee serving? I mean, it seems like everyone's raising policy level points, which is fair coming from your agencies. But if we're waiting for a policy level decision, I don't see what role this committee is contributing to the decision making process.
My only comment I want to make is, Michael, this, budget is complicated to put together, and meeting the timeline put forth is going to be essentially impossible. I'll just say that up front. Because of just our budget alone. So that is a really big concern I want to put out there for the committee.
Understood. Thank you. Vig, did you have a comment that you'd like to bring up in discussion on the motion to delay?
Yes, thank you. Just a question again to clarify on timelines. I think Tom brought a good point about need a concrete strategy. And I know it was mentioned, but I didn't quite follow that Cmap board this Wednesday and then Thursday policy committee. With this item of Aaron, sort of what you mentioned, right? Like giving some of the higher level leadership a view of the budget, the 13 to 17 staff members be an agenda item for either of those two so that we could get that feedback loop that Christina was saying that CTA and others are interested soon and therefore not, create a months of delay or anything like that, which would of course jeopardize the timelines.
So when our board considers our budget, they're really looking at projects, right? And we're putting the people to the project. So we're saying, this year we're wrapping up an update to the long range plan. Next fiscal year, we're going to need to start planning for the 2060 plan, right? So they're not necessarily looking at specific headcount. We're doing the math on like how many people does it take to manage a project and move these things forward, right? And how many people are we going to need to be able to do, small area traffic studies across the region, and how many projects are going to come in from the agencies that we're going to have to model and then send that modeling information to your agencies to get your engineering, your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 engineering stuff moving forward. So, there isn't going to be, yes, they'll probably say, oh, how are you going to spend this? And we'll say with a combination of staff and consultant dollars. I don't think we're going to get into the, oh my gosh, this number of people explicitly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
From a procedural standpoint, unless I missed something here, there was a motion in the second about 20 minutes ago on a particular item, and you have to read it back. That needs to be resolved before you make any other motions, in my estimation. I think Mayor Schilke will probably echo my comments.
Mayor Schilke will second those comments.
Yeah, I was just trying to complete discussion on the motion right now and then go to a vote. So Heather, did you have any other questions or comments?
I was going to suggest something similar, so go ahead.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table to delay, and that's been seconded, and just, I was not writing, so specifically, what was the request to delay to?
So it was to delay the vote until the committee has further opportunity to discuss the use of the 4.1 million. Now, it sounds like perhaps people will be more comfortable if we put a specific date in there instead of just openly saying delaying the vote. Maybe we can say delay until this date if we're able to do that.
So would you like to amend the motion to set a specific date? Or do we vote on the original motion first?
I guess I'd need some guidance on what date could use based. I have not been following on a calendar when all these other meetings are taking place, but it sounds like it would have to be delayed at least a few weeks.
So the Cmap board meets on, hold on, let me pull up my full calendar. 9th.
The second time, I'm sorry, for final approval on February 9th. That's why I'm looking at my calendar now.
We post materials on the 2nd, so we can advance. And so, but Angela is correct in that it's not going to be like, give us a new number and then cut some stuff and then, that's an easy process to do, because when we're messing around, when you mess around with your budget, we're dealing with, the health costs and the overhead, and people are in different grants. And so depending on what types of things we need to move around, we probably need a week to be able to even do that.
I need I'm gonna need longer than, we're gonna have to reconstruct our budget because it's a complicated budget, but yeah, that's, if IDOT's holding us to that timeline, then I'm just looking at the dates. The board approves on February 9th. We should meet 2 weeks before that meeting.
Well, I was reading between the lines, and it seems that if IDOT got a written request to move beyond that February 14th date, they would likely approve that if we give sufficient reasoning behind it.
And the only thing I wouldn't want that to do is risk the us not getting a fully executed agreement by July 1st. And, you know, I know you all work with IDOT. No offense, Mike. I worked at IDOT. You know, that's not up to Mike. That's up to a whole nother level of signature process. So I would hate to risk that.
Well, let's vote then on the motion to delay. Can we go through a roll call?
Where's Molly?
Yep. Okay, roll call on the delay, the budget vote. So first, Pace,
Yes.
RTA,
Yes.
Metra,
Yes.
CDOT,
Yes.
Council of Mayors,
No.
counties,
No.
Cmap,
No.
and CTA.
Yes.
And lastly, Chair.
No, chair only votes if is there a tie? I don't think
No,
there
let me
is.
look. One.
There's no tie.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's 4-3.
It's 5 approved, 3 no.
Well, it sounds like IDOT's going to get a request to delay the okay, so the motion does not pass, or the motion passes, but the approval of the budget is not occurring. So it sounds like, I guess my request would be scope out what folks want to talk about and let me know through a request or something to IDOT whether or not you're going to be able to meet that February 14th date or propose an alternative. So
Mike, if I could, if we're proposing an alternative this late in the game, we're not going to have an answer from you guys. You know, I'd say that's like a last ditch effort. I really think we need to focus on getting this done.
That's certainly my hope too. I'm in kind of an interesting situation where I've set a deadline that you're all having trouble meeting with, while also, you know, giving, you know, this committee the opportunity to weigh in on something that they're interested in. So I'm in a little bit of a tough spot here. Like I said earlier, if I were to receive a request, I would have to take a look at it, but I would really like, you know, to see if Cmap can talk through and answer questions and things like that, and you know, defend the budget to the committee members in order to still meet the deadline. So Amy, did you have a comment or a question?
I was just going to say, it sounds like the committee members are concerned that a vote for this particular budget is indicative of a vote for future budgets and how much money will be allocated to various expenditures for the next 5 years. And I think perhaps while it is difficult to change all the numbers in this particular budget to meet the timeline that we're all talking about, perhaps what we can do is kind of document what those concerns are and the priorities of this committee. And then as we do have conversations with the board and the MPO, we can include those considerations for future years. As both, I think Aaron and Angela have commented, a significant portion of the budget is contracts. And one, as an example, is an ERP. And God willing, we only replace our financial system once every 15 to 20 years, as I'm sure many of your organizations has had to do too. So there are definitely opportunities within this budget and future budgets for expenditures as it relates to the concerns and or priorities of the committee members of this group. So I don't think a vote today or tomorrow or pick your other day is necessarily indicative of this is the final and we're losing out on programs going forward. I think what I hear, and I know what the discussions in Cmap have been, is we do have a brand new infrastructure bill. There are several requirements in there that are going to cause us to have to do new activities. And none of us at this table understands what all of those are. And so some time for planning in 2023 is necessary to get any group of expenditures right as it relates to lining up with the priorities of your organization, this committee, the requirements in the bill. And so I don't think this is a question that any of us can answer in the next week, 2 weeks, or even a month, because there are so many factors. And so perhaps a fruitful way to move forward could be to document what our issues, concerns, or considerations need to be, because it will be in all likelihood a discussion over several months of the coming year.
I agree with what you heard. I heard some desire for people to get a little bit more explanation on why you funded, complete streets at this level versus 13 new staff, and will the 13 new staff mean that's going to be there forever, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think documentation sounds like a good idea to me, and maybe that's going to be something that's going to be helpful to the rest of the committee. But no, I would agree. This is very new. There's a lot of new programs. There's very limited guidance out of DC at this point on most, if not all, of the new programs. And so really precisely what things are going to look like is a little bit difficult to say right now. But I would agree. I heard that, if you hire 13 new staff, then they're going to be there, and that's going to be sort of a constant. And so we're kind of setting it. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. But it definitely sounded like people wanted a little bit more information on how particular funding levels were set for staffing and some of the other programs. And the competitive program was brought up a couple times.
Just a point of clarification, the complete streets hasn't been budgeted. What you see in the budget is 2.5% line. It's not a part of CMAP's budget. It's not a part of anyone's budget. It's what we as a region have to account for. So that's not, embedded in CMAP's budget.
Yeah, it was brought up, I thought, by Tom a couple times, and yeah, there is a 2.5% in the new authorization. So
yeah,
if that's how that was set, that's I think a great explanation. But I think I heard earlier, some desire to talk through, some of the decision making in the budget setting with regards to different programs. So this is not passed, and I guess at this point, we move on in the agenda unless there's going to be an alternate proposal as to how we get through discussions and put it back through the UWP prior to moving forward with it. Is that something that we need to talk through now or regroup on a little bit?
I know, I guess people are waiting for me to put a date out. The disadvantage I have is I have to go back and just look at what's involved. I would prefer to be able to email a date and set up another meeting, but I can't just pick a date now. I have to go back and look at our budget. I mean, again, I'll say it, it's complicated. It's not like pulling numbers out. You pull a person out, you impact, indirect, fringe, the RUT model. There's a lot built into these budgets. But the details of the budget, I can definitely, if you come to the, if you come to the, our meeting with the board, there's a presentation where I highlight the components of our budget in the presentation to the board on Wednesday.
But in all likelihood, Angela, the meeting that this group has to have would be next week.
Okay. So that would be. How
So
about,
why don't we send out a poll?
yeah, yeah, I'm operating at a disadvantage. I would have to send out a poll. We can send out a doodle poll for dates. Okay.
Okay, well, moving on in the agenda then, other business.
No other that I'm aware of.
And did we get any requests for public comment?
Not to my knowledge, no, Mike.
Okay. Well, the next meeting is probably not March 9th any longer. So I guess we'll be looking forward to hearing more from Angela on when we might be able to reconvene.
Right.
Yeah, I will just say that in order for there to be a fruitful discussion next week and for everybody to get questions answered, if there were any specific items that you saw in the budget that you'd like documented or discussed or a little bit more time to understand, if you could communicate that, that would be, I think, very helpful. I know that everybody's willing to make the time to get together again to answer questions and make sure everybody's given the opportunity to have, a full understanding of the budget before, we're asked to vote on it. We can all get together and do that, I hope. It'd probably be really good if you can send anything specific over to do so at your earliest convenience so that, the opportunity is given to Angela to pull things together and give explanations. So anyway, wanted to make that comment before we get to adjournment. If there's no other questions or comments or discussion, does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion.
Moved by Shoki,
A second?
See that
Aye.
seconds.
And a vote.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear who the second was.
See that?
Okay.
Is anybody opposed to adjourning?
Cool.
Okay, well, then the
Roll.
meeting, if I was just gonna go, unless anybody's got any opposition, if there was no opposition, I'd say we just go ahead and adjourn. And I guess Angela, Aaron, do you want to stay on for a couple minutes? We can talk real quick about logistics.
Oh, Aaron's still on. Yes. Okay.
And Aaron doesn't have to stay on. I guess it's probably mostly Angela but I figure we could talk for a couple minutes and try to figure out some date options.
That sounds good.